Hey y'all, Professor Stevenson here. We have made it to spring break, which is pretty awesome. I'm doing this wrap up, and then I've got a whole week to work on an article I have due and a conference presentation. So that should be fun. And to hopefully do a little bit of relaxing. So hopefully I encourage you all to do the same, or just take a week where you don't have to do work for my class. So cool. One of the things I overlooked last week in the wrap up video as a looking forward to the next week is I neglected to talk about the curriculum design groups for number 2. It's in the syllabus, so I'm hoping you met. But if you didn't, remember all of these items go in your portfolio at the end. So there are 3 documents and then one that you make up yourself. So it's meant to build and be part of something. The idea is, again, that you leave something, hopefully you leave with a lot more than that from this class, but that you've gotten together with these groups and you've helped build teaching documents through the class. So it might be something that you're using someone in your group's super awesome idea for an assignment, and that's a good opportunity. So if your group didn't meet exactly last week to go over number 2, no worries. You might be able to accomplish 2 and 3 at the same time. 3 is much later in the semester, so keep that in mind. But if you didn't, your group can contact each other and try to get together again. I would if possible, I don't want to be paternalistic about this. It's just being the first time I've ever taught this class and being the first time I've ever oversaw this type of a group assignment without my hands in it. I trust you all 100%, but if somebody could just send from each group one person, not everyone in the group, just send me a little progress report with where you're at. Like I said, if you say we met for 1 and we had a good assignment, but we haven't gotten together for 2 yet, I'm totally fine with that. This is a little bit of me working back and going, oh yeah. So again, and if you met for 2 and have a really good thing for number 2, that's awesome too. So just one person, and you could even wait until after break. Like I said, I'm one of those proponents of, really checking out for break. So I'm fine with after break, someone sending me an email, one person from your group, and just saying, hey, this is where we're at, Professor Stevenson or Paulette. Great. So this is another one of my favorite weeks, which I have all favorite weeks apparently, where we talk about online teaching and new media, and the Adam Banks talk and the Jackie Rhodes and Jonathan Alexander article. Those are some of my favorite things. So if you didn't love them, that's fine. We can agree to disagree, but yeah. So Amy had really good questions. I think she kind of touched a little bit on everything. So let's get into it. Michelle talked about people who don't get online learning, thinking that lesson plans are too generic and students don't really get the full teacher. Yet she talks about that she has yet to have a cookie cutter course in her online studies. Each class is specifically tailored to that professor, and that she agrees with Warnock that in an online class, an online writing class is a better composition because both the professor and the students are writing literally everything. That last point is really, really great. And yeah, the first time that most people teach an online class and take an online class, they're surprised about how much work it is, especially an online writing class. So this isn't fill in the blank and turn in a test, right? Those courses are design heavy. They're kind of on the backside. They can definitely be kind of seeing where issues are and kind of managing the course. And like I said, design heavy. So like big lectures and stuff like that. But because a writing class is so community based and peer review and discussion and here, do this little assignment, right? To translate that to an online environment is really challenging because it does require the instructor to do so much legwork in explaining and writing and shooting videos and all sorts of things. And it requires the students, like your discussions. If you could just read this, come to class and say this stuff out loud, it would probably actually be easier, right? We could just sit here for 3 hours and talk about this. But instead, if you're anything like me, you put this stuff together and you piece, your posting online isn't just like, I kind of typed this out and I kind of thought about this and I've got some bookmarks in the book. So yeah, I do find that like the online class does kind of level the playing field for the introverts in face-to-face class. So I teach hybrid classes and I often will get really chatty students online who say nothing face-to-face. I also get the same thing with second language writers who have a hard time communicating verbally in their second language. They actually do fine writing. So if we make them if those students have to do presentations in the actual face-to-face class, they are relying on notes really heavily. But in online writing space, in the online discussions and stuff, they're really chatty. So yeah. Lori talked about Rhodes and Alexander suggesting that, quote, we can also broaden our understanding of what the essay is to accommodate a variety of forms, medium modalities, and emerging literacy practices. And then she connected that to what Banks is saying in his address. And she cites the Prezi delivery of an annotated bibliography as an alternative format. I think that's really great. For me, annotated bibliographies are a jumping off point to a multimodal project. So it makes the students kind of do the really weird, the really not boring research part, but it makes us talk about like MLA format and all that stuff. And then it's like, cool, now create a video making an argument. But I really like this. I really like the idea of the annotated bibliography is such a, it's pretty traditionally assigned by a lot of people. I like the idea of innovating that in some way. So the Prezi is a really great idea. I, in the past, had students they were annotated bibliographies, but they had to be accompanied by Google Maps. And this was, I don't know if Google Maps still has this capacity, but they took away this capacity in the middle of a semester and it ruined my whole project. That's technology for you, but you could, dropping a pin. So the students the annotated bibliography, like I wasn't just grading that they had the number of sources, but I really wanted them to think about getting a bunch of different sources. So they had to map the different stakeholders, groups, people, the different historical events having to do with their topic. And then they had to give a presentation kind of explaining their map. And it's a really fun project. It's one of my favorites. But then Google Maps completely lost this capability. So I probably just have to re-research the technology, and somebody could probably just, do a really design friendly thing, but that would take really tech savvy students. Ethan has a really interesting story about how tech crashed his computer in a class. It was a required tech. And I want you all to think about that. as you're thinking about like all this crazy tech stuff you could do with your students, there's a lot of possibilities, and quite honestly, there's some great apps out there, there's some great software out there, but there's also limitations that your students are going to have, and it's sometimes hard to conceive of your students on the other side of the computer. I know a lot of my students write papers and post discussion board posts on their phone. That's one of the things that has always baffled me, but they do it. So think about, and they don't do it just because they're lazy or millennials or whatever. They do it, some of them, because it's an accessibility issue. They don't have Wi-Fi at their house, right? Think about how much Wi-Fi or your home access to internet costs. I know that ours, I have to call Cox like once every 6 months, and it's ridiculous. Just on internet, it's $85 a month for our house, and we have to have it because I teach online and my husband sometimes works from home. Now, maybe you're teaching at a 2-year college and your students work full time and barely make ends meet. To take an online class, they do have to have access to Wi-Fi. But if you're asking them to use some crazy technology that crashes, that is huge, and that might not even work on all sorts of certain computers, that's an issue we have to think of. We really do have to make sure that we're thinking of accessible technologies. So what Ethan talked about, the screen recorder technology, I kind of like rolled my eyes at, because his professor could have literally said, here's a tool, but honestly, use whatever you see fit, right? Like you guys, the leader videos. Some of you have done Google Docs, you put your video in a Google folder. Some of you have done YouTube. Some of you have used like a screencast technology. I'm fine. Like, that's the thing, is it's not necessarily about the technology. I want a video. How you get there is okay for me. So we have to think about that with our students, right? And obviously, like, I don't know, if you want a Google Doc, you want a Google Doc. You don't want a Word doc so there are some things there, but Google Docs is a really accessible technology. Dana said that I really like this statement. She talked about being, as a teacher, you have to be somewhat fearless and cautious at the same time when she introduces new media and new models of rhetorical practice. I have to accept that it might fail and that my students may be more tech savvy than I am and know of a better tool than the one I present. Yeah, especially. And the learning curve for teaching online is pretty steep, because if something fails, you can't go into class and say, okay, like you don't have a physical connection with the students where you can see them and say, okay, let's start all over again. You have to reach out to them. And when you're dealing with students who have like different backgrounds and different relationships with technology, and then also students who like might be struggling with an online class because you have to check in more so maybe like they keep forgetting to check in, like you miss a couple of students. You're like, so remember we were supposed to record videos every week, and it sounds like half of you can't do that. That actually happened to me. This is my favorite way to do discussion, is have someone lead with a video so that we all are grounded by like meeting a person, and then we can kind of think through those ways, having them explain their questions. In one of my community college classes, the first time, nobody could access the video technology. And so I had to be like, we're just going to go back to traditional discussion. Like, optionally, you can use the video. And I tried to sell it as it's easier, and you don't have, like, this is something you don't have to write, which it's composing, but it always gets students. But they were like, yeah, no, we're good. We just like writing these discussion board posts. So not everything that you use on one community will work for another. Christina, so the question that Amy asked about getting instruction materials from online, I thought Christina made a really funny comment. She said, holy moly, though, I almost feel like if somebody else wants to go for it, give it a whirl. Just kidding, but the materials a composition instructor develops and uses set him up a clear and effective and user-friendly course online is not in and of itself what an online class is. The interaction, feedback, the tutoring style engagement, the type that Warnick alluded to, is what an online composition class is. So much feedback, so many technical modalities. I think I put that on like a lot of the grades that I gave you all for this week. The feedback was that online classes take up so much of my time. I'm really, so part of my story that I like to teach these is that, number one, like I was approached with the opportunity to do this with you all, and I really love teaching this course. I like talking to teachers learning their craft or trying to, what is going on with my computer? Teachers trying to get more professional development. So I really like this class. Sorry, I think my video glitched. Anyway, but my English 101 and 102 and 302, so my first year writings and then my 300 level writing classes, like there's a lot of build and a lot of explanation. The fortunate thing with you all is that you know how to take an online class. That's really helpful. My 101 and 102 students don't. And so like part of the class is just like, this is what an online class is. So I was approached by the person who recruited me to teach this class last week. And she's like, I'm so sorry, I haven't checked in on you. How's it going? And I said, I was actually a little worried because I wasn't getting the frantic emails that I normally get from my first year writing students or my 300 level writing students, my upper division writing students who are in online classes, normally like just some of the technicalities of it. And either you all are very good at figuring things out for yourself, which pat yourself on the back, you are, or I've developed so much explaining at this point that the course, the actual just the setting up and the delivery of the course isn't as confusing as it could be. So anyway, I'm going to send out a survey after break is over to get you guys just to give me a little bit of feedback about how things are going. So Austin talks about the passing down of material from more experienced people. And again, responding to Amy's question of like, what about all those, what about the information available online to teach online students? And I don't know about you all, but that all of my teaching documents are like a mashup of something somebody gave me, something I saw at a conference, something that I learned in my first year of TA training, which we all adapted somebody else's documents. So at this point, I'm on my 11th year. I have no clue I would not recognize the original. So that's just something interesting. Anthony talked about cell phones in the classrooms as being a distraction. They absolutely can be. And it kind of depends on where you're at and what you're doing. And I'm in a face-to-face class, I'm an audience reader, so which is probably like if you guys are on the other end of this, I'd be able to see you and I'd be reacting to you. Like, oh, they look bored, or oh, they're really interested in this, so I'll keep talking about this. So I try to read that in students. And the cell phone thing is hard because they're just on their cell phones and you're like, get off. I don't know about you, Anthony, but I've definitely got some shade thrown at me from students who've been on their cell phone. I'm like, what are you doing? You've been on your cell phone all hour. And the student's like, yeah, my mom's in the hospital. And I'm like, crap, I'm sorry. Like, if my mom was in the hospital too, I would be on my cell phone when I'm teaching this class. So my tech policy right now tries to create space for this. I know that's not a popular thing to do because it's really easy to see cell phones as the devil, and trust me, I don't have an opinion on that, but I do know that like most of the time I'm teaching, I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old at home and a 13-year-old in school, and it's my husband's not on call, I am. So if somebody's gotten sick or anything, I have to pay attention. So might be feeling a text from the babysitter, or maybe there's something going on with my son at school. So I'm trying not to be distracted. So like we actually have a conversation about that in class the first couple of weeks, and then sometimes I have a continuing conversation with students about that. So like I come in and I'm like, hey, I noticed you guys have really been on your phones. Like, I don't know if you remember from the beginning of the semester, like my policy is that your technology should be, it's fine that you have it. It's just not that it's distracting. And if you have some big thing that you need to keep checking on, talk to me. And normally it stops it a little bit. But again, not always. But I get it. Aaron talked about these explainer videos, like as an interesting composition. And I think that's a great idea too. He has a couple of examples, and I've definitely seen explainer videos, but they're definitely a genre. One of the things I would say is that some of the multimodal projects, they're really nice to get students in groups to do. Writing a paper in partners or groups can be really difficult for students, although I think it's an excellent exercise. But doing a video with a group is actually an easier exercise because it allows them to, like, maybe somebody's actually really hey, I own the camera. The other person's like, oh, and like, I know how to edit videos. And the other person's like, cool, I'll write the script. And also like my roommate would love to be in it. And so you find out that like students have differential skills, and it works out that way. And if none of them have the skills, it's actually that they're more inclined to learn it in the group setting. So that's the videos. They're the funnest thing that I do in class is if I have a video assignment, students are really interested in it, and we spend like a day showing them in class, and students have a lot of fun with it. Some of the tools that help. So Adobe Spark is a free design tool that's all web-based, and it's really cool because it makes you look really fancy without having any tech skills. If any, through educational license, you're able to get your hands on the Adobe suite. Some of the tools are definitely way more complicated. I'm lucky through one of my institutions, I get the access to the whole suite for $10 a year. And I'm a video editor myself, so I use Adobe Premiere, but apparently a program like Premiere Rush is actually like a way easier video editing platform. And then there's stuff like Windows has Windows Movie Maker and iMovie, and really all of those things are really good for what your students should do. One of the things that I do when I'm looking at videos is I try to think not about the production quality, because obviously if we gave these students a budget and told them to go to town, these would be much better quality. But I think about like the story they're telling, the actual composition, so that if the sound is not so great, the lighting stinks, I'm really thinking about the effort that they put in. Andrew, like me, seemed to be really enamored by banks, but also said that it's really hard to get into his mindset. That, like, he said he doesn't yet understand his profession deep enough to toss those ideologies aside and refuse to play the rules of the game. Yeah, I hear that too. And I didn't either, and I sometimes still don't. So one of my suggestions too about like innovating, if the 5-paragraph essay, if you're still teaching 5-paragraph essays, maybe it's because like the school you said you teach for, that's part of the curriculum design. So I don't want to negate that. If you're like, yeah, I understand that we're talking at the 5 paragraphs, that Adam Banks is like the 4th person this semester who said maybe the 5 paragraph essay isn't so great, but my institution says I have to do it. At that point, you go into administration and you change your institution. I'm half joking, but kind of. But no, like, but if you're like, okay, I get the critique of the 5 paragraph essay, start to think about like, what else? Like, is it an op-ed? You know, maybe that's what you're doing, is you're having students follow a local issue and write an op-ed to try to get published, and maybe they try to send it there too. I don't think it completely gets them out of the 5 paragraph essay, especially if their brain is trained to write for it, but it gets them to thinking about writing for an actual like audience and a purpose. And so that might help with some of the innovative stuff. So that's one of the things. But I told Andrew this in his comments, is that I would argue that like, if you innovate a little thing at a time, like one semester change this. Okay, so now all of a sudden you're going to change your first assignment, and you're going to try to like take the temperature of the students and see how that went. And if that went really well, keep that change and then change something else next semester. And so after a couple of years, you'll have like a really, I made a metaphor about like reinventing the wheel, and the metaphor at the end was like, and by the end you'll have a spaceship, right? Let's see. Allie talked about she talked about some of the innovative teaching examples with new media, creating graphics or memes to go with the information, or opinion writing, analyzing a character's development, create GIFs to support your claim. I don't, like, those of you who teach high school, do your students love GIFs and memes? My 13-year-old is obsessed with them. He thinks he's going to get, like, Oprah rich by creating some meme account on Instagram. And I'm like, okay. But no, I think that's a really good place to, like, meet students in the technology where they're at. Not that all of our assignments need to do that. I think that might be a way to bring in the Rhodes and Alexander. Like, where are students at with their technology, and how can we meet them where they're at too? Not to always be like, oh, like, I don't know. My students never, like, back in the day and blogging is still a thing, but as it first turned about, it was a thing that professors and journalists and thinkers thought about, but like 18-year-old students weren't like, oh my gosh, blogging is so great. They all thought I was crazy. And I think that's still where they're at. They're like, yeah, blogging. You could make them do some blogging, but also like, what do they like to do in terms of technology? I thought that, was it the new media chapter that talked about like writing thick tweets? I'm a Twitter user. And I know that like some of our students are like, oh, what is this Twitter stuff? But really, like, there's an audience and there's a purpose and there's a something happening, right? I like to get students to really think about context of like whatever they even post on social media and why. And Aria talked about, she talked about, Banks. So she loved Banks too, saying she was thrown off guard with the topic of funk. I am a huge George Clinton fan, and a billion years ago I saw him at the House of Blues in Chicago, so that's a weird aside, but he was awesome. But she said she's noticed this is that what stood out to me most is his insistence that too much of our scholarship is alike, that there's a need to assimilate all students' work to a standardized product. And she talked about his quote, invention comes from those who are irreverent, from those who are contrary, from those who are wild. This is such a huge part to the composition class that I can't imagine why scholarship is not more diverse. It is to some extent, but it is not too. But like this is a pretty good call to like let your freak flag fly for academics. That's not so crazy. But, and you might think about, like, this is a good call to arms, or call to action, not call to arms. This is a good call to action for you. Like, if you're like, oh yeah, like, how could I try to be contrary and irreverent and wild as a teacher? I don't know. So anyway, thank you for a good discussion. Have a great spring break. And then when you come back, make sure that you, that Friday when you come back, so you have some time to work through the week, the draft of the teaching philosophy and creative map. I want to remind those of you who haven't taught, you are fine putting together a teaching philosophy. You do not have to put together a creative map unless you want to. I know that the first teaching philosophy I wrote was as someone applying to grad school. Or applying a grad school and applying to be a TA. Most of us had never taught before in our life, but we all had to put together teaching philosophies. And you all have a leg up versus like, I had never taken a pedagogy class in my life. So all I had were these English lit classes, and nobody ever talked about teaching. So I tried to think about the things that the teachers who had come before me did. And I know I spent like 2 pages talking about engagement, which is very vague and very broad. But like I said, the goal of this is not to be perfect, but to maybe you're at a good spot where you have a teaching philosophy and it's a good time to revise it. Maybe it's a time to get one down on paper. And like I said, if you have zero desire to do a teaching philosophy, the creative maps are really good, and they kind of think about what's a different modality for this. So, yeah. So awesome. Have a good break, and I will see you later.